Could satellite imagery change journalism? What can technical experts do with deepfakes? And how should we best prepare the students to deal with the technologies we don't know yet? Welcome to Visual Futures of the Media. My name is Øyvind Vågnes, and I'll be hosting this live-streamed event. Visual Futures of the Media is the culmination of the Viz Media Research Project, which was financed by the Norwegian Research Council and started 5 years ago. Exploring social implications of visual technologies in the news media, the truly interdisciplinary Viz Media team has consisted of an international group of top-level researchers. You'll be able to see some of them in the upcoming sessions. It feels just right to sum up 5 years of trying to anticipate future events critically with a live-streamed event, with key speakers beaming in from across the world. On this day, the expression, "Who knows what tomorrow might bring," sounds very resonant in so many ways. But first, to wish you welcome more properly, here's Professor and Vice Rector of Teaching and Learning at the University of Bergen, Oddrun Samdal.
Technology helps set the parameters of possibility. It frames our range of potential futures, but it doesn't select one for us. These are important words by the Guardian columnist Ben Tarnoff. And I think it is important to remember, as our everyday lives have changed drastically over the last decades, and not to say the last year. Changes with incredibly fast technological advancement, with development of artificial intelligence, with the advent and rise of social media. And these developments systematically challenge our societal structures. However, I think we do need to remember that when we face challenges from these advancements, they are results of human choice and decision. Through history, many scholars have tried to predict the future. And with the benefit of hindsight, we can say that what a difficult and probably impossible task it is. Nevertheless, this does not mean we should not try or prepare. We should, of course, strive to stay one step ahead. And I think in this short introduction by Professor Øyvind Vågnes, he hit the nail on the head in this regard. He asked the question about how to best prepare our students to deal with, and I would also say develop, the technologies we don't know yet. I believe this is fundamental to face the challenges from technological development. Because we would not just be preparing the students, we would be preparing the society itself for a fast-developing future. And this is important, because even if prediction can be inaccurate and difficult, we know for certain that students would both live and take part in shaping the future. This means the knowledge and the methods that students acquire through their education will be of key importance. Flexibility, critical thinking, and an understanding of the overarching societal structures of humanity and our relationship with the world. These concepts and skills become ever more important. And I am convinced that if we better integrate students in ongoing development and research, it would be beneficial for educators, for researchers, and the students themselves. And this is key to prepare for dealing with technologies we don't know about yet. Today, in the Visual Futures of the Media Conference, we see how this value is put into practice and elevated by the students' role and competence integrated. not just through the topics of the program, but in the execution of the presentations and discussions. Students and researchers have come together to frame suggestive scenarios based on comprehensive new research. As we know, our students will shape the future. This adds a weight to our topic of discussion. And with this, I welcome you all, and I hope you will have a stimulating and thought-provoking conference.
Thanks, Oddrun. We suspect that there will be many questions today, and you, the audience, will actually be able to participate directly. For more about this, over to Maja.
Hello, my name is Maja and I am responsible for Slido. Slido is a very easy and simple platform for Q&A interactive events. And we use Slido today so the audience at home can participate and engage in today's talks and presentations. As I said, it's very easy to use. You can either scan the QR code and participate, or you can go into slido.com and enter the code we have on the screen. Throughout our panel debates, you can ask questions that we will discuss in our debates. So yeah, enjoy the conference and remember that there is no stupid questions. Back to Øyvind.
Thanks, Maja. Our very first presenter is director of the Viz Media project, my esteemed colleague at the Department of Information, Science and Media Studies, Professor Astrid Gynnell. But first, a short video to lead you into Astrid's presentation.
Hello, everyone. It was really cool to see these clips from the old conferences. In particular, I liked, of course, to see the old drone clips. They were actually from our first conference in 2016, and even if that's only 5 years ago, it feels like it took place in another century. Such indoor precision flying was kind of a sensation back then. Actually, many people did not know yet what a camera drone was like. And what has happened since? The global drone industry has escalated at a pace that no one could ever dream of. The news is over-flooded with imagery from above. And helicopters as a tool in journalism are a thing of the past. Next, please. When we started this project, we wanted to investigate some technologies that we anticipated would change journalism considerably in the years to come. We focused on the adoption of camera drones, smartphones, and CCTV cameras, and we discussed thermic cameras as a thing of the future. Moreover, we anticipated that imagery from wearable technologies would surface in the news media. The same would happen with facial recognition data, and we vaguely discussed another term, immersive journalism. These were all emerging technologies in the news, we noted. There were new tools in the making. We anticipated that the impact of these technologies could become profound. Keywords were transparency versus privacy, automation, and manipulation. So we started our journey with the tools that were trending in journalism. Could you imagine? A bunch of people. We came from 4 different disciplines, 3 countries. We agreed that the goal was to investigate the social implications of these technologies. What implications did they have for journalists, for the news media? To what extent were they used for surveillance? And what kind of surveillance, for good or for bad? What was surveillance? I think we only had vague expectations as to what we would experience. I mean, how can you know about a challenge before it emerges? An emerging technology is not fully realized yet. That can only happen in the future, so we need to be looking ahead. When we anticipate something, it means that we foresee, we predict, or we forecast, or we expect. How could we anticipate in a more systematic way than just trusting the intuition? In this project, we use social empirical methods that underline the importance of democratic processes. We were very lucky to apply a framework which I think was meant to break up people's mindsets. Responsible research and innovation is not something to talk about. It is learning by doing. Responsible research is a way to shake up your presuppositions and test your values, boundaries, and professional norms. RI means reflection in action, experiential learning, critical dialogues. We were forced to reflect on what the humans want as well as what technology wants. And we were challenged to start asking what-if questions. What if deepfakes threaten democratic elections? What if the smartphone is primarily a surveillance kit? Within this framework, our mission was to anticipate, to reflect on what is going on, to initiate public engagement, and to act on what we found out. Doing RI is, in this perspective, an ongoing negotiation about sustainable values in society. The next question to ask is, of course, how do you do all this stuff within one project? Here are some takeaways from Viz Media as an interdisciplinary project. Turn ideas upside down and expose yourself to risks. Check out what you didn't think you could ever do. A main goal of RI is empowerment, helping people to overcome future challenges. The best way to help is often to be a frontrunner, even if it's scary. And your best helpers to overcome fears are often your students. Invest in outreach activities, engage with the students, invite stakeholders. Be present when the world is on fire, even if you had planned for something else. RI has room for explorative methods and new ways of collaborating. Work with words, seek to understand and refine the concepts and the terms that you're using. A central concept in one field might mean something else in another field. Imagery is easily accessible today, easily shared, and very easily manipulated. And imagery is all over us. Exactly therefore, I think we need the words more than ever. We need verbal language to reflect on what we don't know yet. Emojis and snaps will not be sufficient to share our future fears and expectations. Have fun and experiment with scenario work. Scenarios are not right or wrong. Rather, they alert us to see potential outcome spaces. I think the best experience we had as a group during these 5 years was the first workshop in which we played really high five with scenario development. We were in a far away place and really had great fun. Appreciate discipline, diversity, value it. It has been great to meet across and to learn from each other. And it has been great to experience that we were like a democracy in miniature in our group. Nick, Paul, Deborah, and Turo, we've been hoping for one whole year now that you could come over for this conference. Thanks to new technologies, we will at least see you in just a few minutes. But it's not quite the same, though. In this special situation, then, I take the opportunity to extend my thanks to all who have contributed to this conference and to the Viz Media project in the 5 years that have passed. We met on similarities and we grew on differences. Together, we have learned a little bit more about how to critically assess the technologies we are facing and at the same time embrace the uncertainties of the future. We have learned that future is not fixed. There are several outcome spaces. As humans, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to try to shape these spaces. So I see this conference not as an end to something, but as a beginning of something else, a next step into the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Astrid. Moving on with the program. Student videos will serve as appetizers of sorts to the 3 main sessions in today's program. And these teasers are all made by students in the bachelor's program for television production at our Department of Information Science and Media Studies at the University of Bergen. And so, here is the first one to introduce our first session on news surveillance from above.
It's time to take your medication. Both of them. Your outdoor time starts in 15 minutes. Enjoy your time. Male 442 fell on the icy road 74 meters ahead. Please choose another running path for your own safety. Please pick up your garbage. Pick up your garbage. Good morning. it's time for you to take your medication.
What about my outdoor time?
Your outdoor time has been revoked.
Why?
Public littering at 11:32 a.m. yesterday.
What? No!
Affirmative, we've got visual. You're clear to apprehend FEMO 173.
The gaze from above also generates new modes of storytelling in the arts, but also in journalism. Remember, you can ask questions through Slido, and I'm reminding you of this because now we have our second presenter today ready, which is none other than Turo Uskali, Associate Professor and Head of the Journalism Program at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. And Turo will be talking about satellite storytelling in journalism. So over to Turo.
So, thank you. So 5 years ago, I think we started to play with drones, and now I think we have ended to even a little bit more higher. And I'm talking about satellites and especially focusing on journalism. So let's take the second slide. So satellite journalism, in our definition, that is journalism that utilizes data collected by satellites as a source of information. And in this definition, it includes also the use of satellite imagery and other geospatial data produced by satellites, such as for mapping or location purposes. The next slide will sort of have a short summary of the history of how satellites and journalism have been playing together. So it all started already in 1960s with Telstar, which was a American, British, and French collaboration. I mean, those countries' TV agencies worked together, and they enabled television programs to be sent across the Atlantic Ocean. But it was not, until the 1980s that the inexpensive satellite links were available also for the news media. And I think the Atlanta-based cable news network known as CNN was one of the first who realized that this can be used also for news purposes, and they sort of started a 24/7 kind of news environment where we are living even now. So they started to use this in expensive satellite links first for their domestic news production, and then later on for their international news productions. During the 1980s, there were many media companies which started to also, thinking about how about launching their own satellites. But at that time, it was too expensive, and this kind of initiatives like Mediasat was too expensive to put in practice. However, news media started to get satellite images from satellite providers and actually used in hundreds in news stories from 1985 to 1989, and of course since after. The next slide and the session will tell about the possibilities and pitfalls of using satellite images for journalistic purposes, and we start with pitfalls, of course. So 2003, there were a presentation at the United Nations by Secretary of State Colin Powell, who used satellite and other images as a proof of Iraq's lies about weapons of mass destruction. Of course, there were many other documents as well, and also audio tapes were there shown. But all these sort of try to demonstrate how Iraq was secretly developing massive destruction, weapons of mass destruction. And of course, at that time, the satellite images were very new, and they were almost uncritically taken by the journalist, and so it was just one of those documents that in hindsight proved to be wrong, and sort of were part of propaganda. So the next slide shows an example of after and before kind of comparisons, and this was during the Asian tsunami after that, and at that time it was really difficult to understand what was happening in those areas which were affected by the floods and the tsunami waves. But I think the satellite images were one of those first sort of documentations that indeed something very terrible has happened, and only afterwards the magnitude of the destruction was realized. The next slide tells that more recently, for example, ProPublica, which is an investigative reporting organization situated in New York, they were using among the very first this kind of archived satellite images for their investigative reporting stories about how the seaside of the Gulf of Mexico was rising all the time, and how this was affecting the people who were living and still are living in that area. And it was partly because of the drilling, the oil industry, and part of the climate change. So the next slide is also an example of a investigative reporting network. This is Bellingcat, situated in the UK. The downing of the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was one of those first day stories where they used also satellite images in order to understand what was happening in eastern Ukraine. And later on, they have used satellite images in many other day stories as well. So the next slide, of course, one of the topics which will follow, sadly, in the near future for a long time is the climate crisis. And these images was taken from the New York Times, and it clearly shows us how the Antarctica is melting like never before. So just one image, one satellite image, will tell a lot of the story. And the next one, as we are living right now in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, this kind of before and after imagery can tell, for example, how in terms of air pollution the changes happened. At least for some time, the air pollution was less, for example, in China or in northern part of Italy. So you can, of course, insert special filters for those satellites cameras, and then you can go even more deeply to many areas, especially in terms of environmental reporting. The next slide tells about the story about Uyghur detention camps or concentration camps in China. It's very difficult to enter there as a journalist and to sort of report what is really happening there. So the satellite images can provide some evidence and documentation. And this story theme has been there already for several years, and there's every year actually there are some updated images coming from the satellite, and this story was feed some weeks ago, so giving us once again more evidence what's happening there. So the next slide, just briefly summarizing the satellite images used so far for mainly international reporting, crisis reporting, and investigative reporting, and mainly by major international news organizations. So those are even before being, the innovators and early adopters in terms of innovations in journalism. And the next slide will tell what is the situation right now. So there are almost 3,000 satellites already constantly circulating the orbit, and as many as 40 countries are there part of this kind of satellite activities. So there are plenty of satellite data sets available actually to all of us already, and they are really high resolution images. So even up to 30 centimeters. And there are several providers, for example, NASA, ESA, Maxar Technologies, Planet Labs are giving actually away satellite images for free, especially for journalistic purposes. And of course, international news agencies are constantly circulating satellite images related to timely news events. So about the future predictions then, well, there are at least two of those I want to mention here. The first one is that it seems that even the big players have started to use the satellite images already, and since 1980s, there is a great space for other news organizations as well to step in, and especially national and even maybe in regional levels. So the next slide will tell you one example from Norway, actually. Eli Frifrudal, we interviewed him last autumn, and he told us a story when Weatherscan was able to sort of use satellite images to understand what happened during the Ukrainian passenger jet crash in January 2020. And he used satellite images as well. And actually, they were able to reconstruct what happened there before, for example, New York Times, but they were sort of still hesitant to publish the stories. So they waited for the time that the New York Times had published the story, and then just minutes after, they also published their story on their website. But I think it's already possible that also this kind of national outlets will be the first ones to publish this kind of breaking stories about these kind of news events. The next slide will also say that there is a big bottleneck still in terms of using satellite images in newsrooms, and that's education and lack of education. And I think, like the next slide will show, that actually we are very close to that moment that we are able to create this kind of educational session. We made a pilot course in Jyväskylä last autumn. We had 20 master students, and they were participating in this kind of module. And after that course, they are now able to use satellite images in their stories. And we also tested this kind of education model online with the help of some pioneering Finnish newsrooms, and it worked nicely. And also, in the end of last year, we opened online course on satellite journalism, so everyone capable of reading Finnish can go there and do the course online. The next slide will offer some of those websites in English, which already can give some advice for how to start to use satellite images. So I think this is already a ubiquitous opportunity to all newsrooms and journalists to work with. So I think that was all from my part. Thank you.
Thanks, Turo. Our third presenter today, and our second for this session on news surveillance from above, is Paul Adams, Director of Urban Studies, Department of Geography and the Environment at the University of Austin, Texas. Paul's talk is on surveilling climate change from above. Paul, the floor, such as it is yours.
Thank you. Thanks to Astrid and to the Viz Media team. So we can go ahead and start the slides now. So my talk is remote but engaged, thinking about the way that the remote view of the planet may help promote a sense of engagement with environmental change. So one way it does that is by serving a huge amount of information in a way that's very quickly processed. So what we can see here is the climate change captured in a large number of images of the heat of the Earth. Next slide. So work by Maxwell Boykoff, who has focused his career on this topic, points out that visual imagery can increase our sense of engagement with the topic. It can provide a huge amount of information in a very compact fashion, and it can have what we call affective power, moving people emotionally. And in the case of environmental change, that is a very important issue because many people feel disengaged and they don't see this as a top priority. Next slide. So the remote view of the Earth from space is becoming our reality of what the Earth is. And to the point that it's hard to explain, and it would take 20 minutes or 30 minutes with a classroom to help the students separate the reality of the Earth from our visions of the Earth. And this is just one example of an image that is reconstructed from digital data that was captured from satellites. Next. So Astrid and I, many years ago, as a result of an earlier research visit in Norway, did some research on how people received and responded to information about the environment that was being delivered in various forms. And we found that there could be some weaknesses. We weren't looking at remote sensing at the time, but we found that people have a strong sense of local attachment, and it's important to try to speak to that when changing their environmental attitudes. And we found that it helps when people are engaged with images rather than just viewing static imagery. And so in both of these ways, there's maybe a caution about using remote sensing images to try to change people's attitudes about the environment. Next slide. So that cautionary note is runs all through social science. Next slide. For example, if you read Paul Virilio's book War and Cinema, it conveys the idea that there's some sort of a deep level of connection between film and video and warfare. Next. Interesting collection of research by John Pickles. It's now very dated, but nonetheless interesting. Called Ground Truth, looks at GIS, which is the use of computers to process digital data in map-like form. And he finds a sort of Foucauldian connection between the power of that imagery and other forms of social power. Next. A more recent book by Dennis Cosgrove called Apollo's Eye critiques the tradition of looking at the world as a whole and links that to ways of asserting authority. Next slide. So there are many more examples in the literature, and it's something to be aware of when researching the topic of remote sensing imagery, is that social scientists have critiqued this sort of a gaze from above, a panoptic gaze, an omniscient gaze that has some claim to power. So despite all of this, next slide. However, next, assuming that these images of climate change are potentially helpful, next, and that the question is, what can we learn from this for journalism? Next. First of all, stepping back, let's think a little bit more about what remote sensing is. Next. So the part that we are most familiar with is the satellite, of course, and the idea that it is taking pictures of the Earth. So this image sort of captures what I think enters most people's mind when they think of remote sensing. Next. But it is an artificial way of seeing the Earth, or a constructed way of looking at the Earth. So the picture on the upper right is using real colors, as you would see them if you were in a space station, let's say. The other three pictures are actually more typical of the analysis of remote sensing images. And here what we're seeing is a remixing of bandwidths in different combinations to bring out details that relate to what's going on the surface of the Earth. So remote sensing images actually require a certain amount of background information to be able to interpret and understand. Part of that learning has to do with learning what the different ways of mixing bandwidths are and how that brings different things to being visible. Next. And here we have the huge panoply of things that are up in the air that NASA is operating, that's providing imagery. So it's not just a certain line or brand or type of satellites, but it's many different kinds of satellites, even just used by NASA to measure all different sorts of things, including temperatures and soil moisture and many other things that these satellites can see. Next. ESA, their Copernicus program, is also surveilling the Earth to measure environmental change. Next. And to understand remote sensing, then we can't just think about a satellite. We can't just think about the taking pictures, because they're not just pictures. There are multiple bandwidths that are remixed in various ways by various people for various purposes. I can't go into everything that's on this diagram. The basic point of it, though, is that remote sensing is actually a network of different things that are interconnected, including particular kinds of actors who are collecting information, reusing information, processing information, and these are all intersecting with journalism. Click, please. So journalism is itself an actor network. So to understand the journalistic interaction with remote sensing, we have to think about two networks that are interacting, networks of technologies, visualities, discourses, actors, and practices in both cases. Next, please. So in short, then, to understand remote sensing, we have to think of it as heterogeneous elements, various things that are not the same as each other. These are producing novel ways of looking at the Earth and perceiving what's happening on the surface of the Earth. These different ways of looking at the Earth are being orchestrated by various actors, and they're creating images that are occasionally incorporated into the news. And I emphasize occasionally because there's a lot more good imagery being created than shows up in the news. The news brings in a very small percentage of what's available that could be turned into news stories. Next. So if you are a journalism professional, where can you find these images to use? If you're a researcher, where can you find these images to study? Turo has outlined more sources. I'll just give a couple examples. Next. So Copernicus has an open access hub. It produces an enormous amount of images. You can see on the part that I've highlighted there, it says 31,838 products published in the last 24 hours. So this is an absolute flood of potential imagery, but it's very hard to figure out what to use. Next slide. NASA has a free resource, the Earth Observatory, which processes the images more, it's a lot more selective, and it gathers and categorizes the images for easy use. So it is a very sort of a publicly oriented source for these images. It's designed for news media and for research. Next. On the Earth Observatory, you can pick a topic, and it will generate a large array of different options that would fit that particular search term. So here you can see a bunch of results from a particular topic. Next. And when you look closely at any of these particular options, what you see is the image, but also a set of different categories that image would be associated with. So in other words, it's a large sort of networked system of classifications that they're using to organize the images. And then if you click on the title of any one of these images, it'll bring up a bunch of information. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the information that could be brought up by clicking on a particular image that has to do with Siberian warming. And as you'll see, this is not a visual image. I mean, it's a visual image presented to us, but it wasn't captured in visible wavelengths. Data was captured and then processed in order to produce what we call a thematic map. So the map then is accompanied by a detailed explanation with links to various other pages and much more detailed explanations of what you're seeing. And I think this is an absolutely essential component of any kind of remote sensing data. It requires a fair amount of explanation for the viewer to understand what they're seeing, because there are so many ways to see it, so many ways to process the initial data, much of it outside of our visual spectrum. So we're talking about infrared and ultraviolet, or mixing combinations of wavelengths in ways that the human eye doesn't see. So the explanation is required, I think, to have journalists be able to make sense of it, and it's there. So Earth Observatory is a great resource. Next slide. But it also presents a research puzzle to try to figure out how useful has this been. NASA doesn't have the human resources to keep track of when its images are being used or how they're being used. This I found astonishing. it was sort of the first point in this research project where I found that they couldn't give me any information because they didn't have it. They produce the images and the accompanying text, but they don't really know how much of it is being used or how. So it would be very, very interesting to know what sorts of images tend to go viral, and specifically, how do they go viral? What sort of borrowing is happening from one source to another to another? For example, as Turo mentioned, New York Times can be seen as taking the lead. Sometimes, if they promote a story, then other news sources will pick up on it. But they're certainly not the only news source that will do this and then cause others to pay attention. So there's a puzzle there to understand how this imagery is being used. Next. So unfortunately, I haven't taken the research project farther than this. I've identified that this is a puzzle to solve. My plans are in spring and summer to begin looking at this process. And that brings me to the next slide, which is, how can you figure out when the images have been used? This, fortunately, depends on another technology that is in place, and that is image search online. So Google will allow you to upload an image and then search for every website that uses that image. It's a Google image search. And it has its strengths and its weaknesses. The weakness is that it brings in a lot of different images. It's not very selective. The strength is exactly that you can see all the sites that may have used the image. But something called TinEye, which I have shown a screen grab from on the right, TinEye will only return positive hits on sites that are actually using that particular image. It's very specific. Next slide. So using this story then to see where it went. Next slide. TinEye returned 70 sites that were using this image, 70 results, and click, please. Here are those sites boiled down, and as it turns out, it's not really 70 because many of them were using the image multiple times within the site. For example, if you want to link to the story from some other part of the site. So when you boil it down, you get Washington Post, NPR, that's National Public Radio, BBC, The Guardian, Daily Mail, so on and so forth. There were major news sources. There were online news sources of specialized interest. There were different international organizations. It was just a very interesting collection of different groups using this imagery. It really kind of went viral. Next image. Sometimes they don't go viral. This particular one, which also arguably was just as useful for news, did not go viral, had 0 matches. No one used it. And I find this very fascinating. Now, this was published on January 6th. There were other things happening on January 6th. American news media were a little bit preoccupied on January 6th because we were having our mini revolution of 2021. And unfortunately, that drowned out all the other news. It's been hard to find out anything about anything in the US except for our difficult political situation. Next slide. So this can obviously produce results that reflect other news, and it's about the context of news, and any analysis of the effectiveness of remote sensing images in the news has to take into account that these are interacting with other news that's happening at the same time. Next slide. So just some final thoughts to wrap things up then. The political and ethical concerns with surveillance are something we always need to keep in mind, even if we are advocating the use of a form of surveillance to understand the Earth's environment and how it's changing. There are some questionable purposes for remote sensing, so as we become more and more dependent on it and it becomes more and more part of how we understand the planet, we have to become even more aware of the potential harms caused by this form of surveillance and as it becomes more pervasive. We also have to be aware that this is a distant and abstract gaze, and a certain segment of the audience doesn't care. They're not interested. I've worked with people in my research who say the Arctic is far away and it doesn't bother them if it melts. They don't mind. They don't care if the polar bears go extinct. This is a very common attitude in rural parts of the United States where I've done research. They're interested in something that might affect their hometown. So this is an issue to keep in mind. Remote sensing imagery doesn't solve all the problems that we face with getting across climate change messages. And finally, I still believe that if we can better understand how these images are being used and if we can track them, then we'll understand how to bridge the gap between earth science on the one hand and journalism on the other. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. So we have a question from a viewer. Will these sessions be recorded and be available for you to watch after the event? And they are being recorded, so you will be able to watch later and rewatch later. So our next presenter, the third and last for this session, is Thomas Wold, Associate Professor at Nord University in Norway. And Thomas will be talking about traffic surveillance as entertainment and activism. Over to you, Thomas.
Well, greetings, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. And thank you to the organizers for piecing this together. Turo and Paul has talked a bit about some very advanced types of surveillance from above. I will talk about some easier modes of surveillance from ground level and from your neighbor. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about how public roads are one of the most monitored areas in our society. Some of this road surveillance can be said to come from above, at least figuratively speaking, as it is surveillance initiated by the authorities. Usually it has to do with like automatic speed controls and the collecting of toll money. And as a byproduct, they also gather a lot of information about where your car is at any given moment. But I will not elaborate on that topic now. The second level is the surveillance performed by commercial companies, typically a gas station or other businesses along the road with camera surveillance on the property, and as a side effect, they also film parts of the traffic. The third level is the peer-to-peer surveillance, which is anyone with a dash camera in their car or cameras on their helmets or bicycles or motorcycles, and of course the mobile phone. And in effect, our roads are full with cameras, and it's the peer-to-peer surveillance I'll be looking at today. As you can see, traffic videos are very popular on social media and in online newspapers, but why do we film? And how are these videos being used? In one way, it reflects a general trend in society. We film pretty much everything, almost by reflex. Sometimes we are aware of why we film, and sometimes we just film without giving it too much thought. So I will be looking at some of the characteristics of these traffic videos. For the next slide, we can see a typical example of the annoying behavior of others on the road. This is a screenshot from a video filmed by a truck driver. He posted it on Facebook. There's a group of cyclists in front of him, and he complained that they slowed down the traffic and it delayed him in his work. And the comment section went wild. There's often a heated debate between cyclists and motorists on social media, which I will return to later. But first, the next slide will show another popular category, is the unsafe or unusual cargo. This is a mixed category of entertainment and information, and I often use as warnings, like this is not how you should do it. These images also have a certain wow factor to them, that it amazes people and are spectacular to look at, and not necessarily the ways you want things to be spectacular. Another spectacular is the next slide. It's the close calls. These are very popular. There's a lot of them. And there's a lot of these close call traffic videos, typically where someone takes a chance on a risky overtaking. These videos are often picked up by newspapers, and sometimes they are even provided by the police. As we can see on the next slide that sometimes these close calls become too close to call and end up in accidents caught on tape and provide very dramatic images. The car who is filming is eventually also hit by the truck coming towards it there. And the next slide, filming the site after an accident is also a thing, and this is sometimes problematic because amateur photographers get in the way of paramedics, and there's also the issue of privacy for the ones who are injured, and amateur photographers does not have the same training in this as the professional photographers. This, on one way, this can be seen as a continuation of the ambulance chasers who would follow ambulance and fire engines to get footage they could sell to news providers. Apart from that, the site of an accident has always attracted an audience. And now this audience have cameras. On the next slide, we can see on a different note, sometimes the motivation for filming is to brag. We have examples of mainly young men who film their own reckless driving to show it to their friends. You can barely see the numbers on the speedometer here, but he's driving at 185 kilometers an hour and the speed limit is 60. So he filmed it, he tripled it while filming. These videos are of course sometimes used as evidence against them in courts. And videos can also serve as an insurance and as evidence. And I'm sure we will see more of this in the future. This is from a dash camera of a truck driver again. A sports car overtook him and started braking very hard immediately afterwards. So the truck driver wasn't able to stop and hit the sports car in the rear, and he was accused of reckless driving. But a video from the dash camera proved that it was the driver of the sports car who indeed violated several traffic rules and caused the accident. So the truck driver was acquitted, partly because of the video. Video has also been used as a security measure against fraud. I've seen examples where pedestrians are throwing themselves on the hood of a car to make it look like they were being hit by the car, surely with the intention to sue the driver. A dashcam can expose this fraud. There's also the question of activism, and as we can see here, this is a very clear and different motivation. I mentioned the tension between cyclists and motorists, and there are several bicycle activists who use a GoPro and social media to post videos of, for instance, cars parked in bike lanes or to document less bicycle-friendly road structures. We also have the issue of viral trends and challenges. One viral trend was ghost riding, which meant to exit a moving car and run alongside it while filming, like this lady is doing in the middle of traffic. On the next slide, we see another example of ghost riding. These boys had the sense to do it in a sort of secluded area, at least. And the car is moving, and yes, they are climbing on top of it, including the driver, and they eventually fall down. And this example doesn't answer why we film. Obviously, there are examples like this where publicity or attention is a motivation, sometimes for economic gain. Some videos go viral, and some are being sold to news services or in other ways being monetized. Another reason for filming is the creative expression. You can create time-lapse videos, have spectacular nature scenery, or any quirky or surprising thing that might happen. Yet again, on next slide, we have the filming that doesn't seem to have any clear motivation. We simply film everything. Whenever we see something unusual, funny, or absurd, our first impulse is often to pick up the camera. And this is a popular category. The person sitting on the road is actually the driver of the red car who's at the side of the road, or he was at least. The car sort of escaped him. For the next slide, there's an open question here, whether this peer-to-peer surveillance can have an effect on road safety. We've seen some examples with handheld mobile phones and getting out of a moving vehicle. Of course, that affects road safety. But in a wider picture, does it affect road safety? This is an area where many people get hurt or injured every year. We know that automatic speed controls decreases the speed on the monitored area. So we know that camera surveillance can, under some circumstances, affect the way people behave. But when it comes to the peer-to-peer surveillance in traffic, we know very little about how this affects people's behavior in traffic. And also, the discussions these videos provoke in social media, do they affect our behavior in traffic? It might affect the way we think and reflect about traffic, our frames of references and our attitudes and our knowledge and understanding of traffic safety. So last slide, I think. Yeah. So we can only say for sure that there will be more and more cameras on the roads. And as I now work at the traffic department at the North University, this is something I will look further into in the next years. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. How to follow up these 3 fascinating presentations? With conversations, of course, and we're now going to stage a panel discussion. So, for the first time today, but not the last, it's my pleasure to introduce Hilde Sandvik, our key moderator in today's panel conversations. Now, Hilde is a renowned and respected journalist in the Nordic countries, and Nordic members of the audience will know her voice well from various radio programs. Hilde, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thanks for this possibility to really dive into some very intriguing topics of today and for the future. And I sit here together with one person sitting here physically with me, and Kjersti Løken Stavrum, are you with us from Oslo?
I'm absolutely joining you.
Hi.
From a grey and snowy Oslo.
Nice to see you here. And you can say hello to Anja Salzman, who is a PhD now, researcher, both personally and professionally engaged in these topics. Anja, you have been very much engaged in fighting surveillance capitalism. And I will ask both of you, first you, Anja, how did you, was it your professional part or your personal part listening into these 3 presentations? And are you now worried or are you intrigued?
I think there's many questions at once. So I have to make clear that I haven't been activating against satellite journalism, but I think it's a fascinating example to think about surveillance technologies and the role of technologies in general, that their ambiguous role in a way. So these are risky technologies which have on the one hand a very big chance or possibilities for society. On the other hand, of course, they introduce you new challenges, of power relations and as also Paul has mentioned in his discussion or in his presentation about destructional effects or, for example, new power relations. So this is interesting. So of course, you mentioned I'm fighting surveillance capitalism. For being more concrete, surveillance gets in this digital age more and more a kind of precondition. Because in a way, if you see how these new technologies are working, then it is in a way important that they get data, and it gets also, as this satellite technology shows, a new visibility, which on the one hand is a threat, and on the other hand, a very chance. If you can see with climate change, for example, to making abstract topics more understandable and more close to people. Also, Paul has
Because
mentioned.
I was thinking both of you has served as journalists, and Kjersti, you are now CEO of the Tinius Trust, but you also serve as president at Norske Penn, fighting for freedom of speech, and you also chair now the very important work on Freedom of Speech Commission. And who were you listening in? Were you the president, the journalist, the organizer, or who of you three ticked in here?
I'm mainly still and always the journalist. I think it's in my DNA.
Yeah.
But and it made me recapture my own career, because I started as a journalist putting a paper in the typewriter. And since then, I think all the sort of technical and digital improvements have empowered journalism and access to information. Maybe apart from the typewriter, all of them have downsides. Yeah. But there are mainly upsides. And our challenge, of course, is to handle the downsides. And that's why we also are very preoccupied with the negative parts of innovations. That discussion is always on the negative part, but the sort of the improvements, the upside is for everyone to enjoy. And I think the three presentations here are mainly about empowering journalism. And just to remind us, I think journalism's imperative is to set a story in different angles, and of course drones and satellites, they provide an angle that we didn't have before. We can tell stories from another perspective, and we can bring in facts that we didn't have. One of the examples that wasn't mentioned, but that could have been mentioned in the presentation, was of course the extinction and of the villages of Rohingyas in Myanmar, where the Reuters journalist had access to satellite images that showed that the villages were destroyed, and that was crucial information for the debate, for the realization what was going on in Myanmar. Yeah, I'm the journalist, but of course I would love to take part in the surveillance discussion as well, and of course the both funny and also informing pictures in of how we behave in the traffic is more troublesome, But then we can talk a little bit about press ethics also, maybe.
Yeah, but because I was now when I was watching the pictures and listening into the presentations, I thought, are we now fully equipped? Do we understand pictures? Do we know enough to somehow to read the pictures right? What do you say, Anja?
I think I would say the same as Paul has said. I mean, especially with regarding to the satellite journalism, I think it needs a kind of knowledge and competence in order to read these pictures in the right way and to get the message. I would take it, because as you said, there are many different there are new angles, and I mean these are pictures, so there's a lot of space for interpretation, and I really agree there are big chances for journalism, and especially also in terms of climate discussions, for example, to make things visible which are people not aware about. So there's a very big opportunities also to use these new technologies.
Ture was talking about actually a study for satellite journalism. Is that a new thought? Should we think more about that, Kjersti? Do we need that?
Well, the interesting thing about satellite journalism is that we are dependent on deliverance from someone who we not really know very much. We don't have control of how the images are brought to us. And I would also like to support the point of view that sometimes I look at these images and I read the capture saying that this shows this and this, and I think, okay, that you
tell
say,
me.
but I cannot see it. Yeah, you tell me. And of course, we should also hope for technical improvement, so it's easier to interpret them personally. But that also means that it's difficult for journalists to really know if they are trustworthy, if they are accurate, if they are what they really sort of claim to be.
It's one of the questions we've gotten here on the slide, and I'm sitting here with the iPad because people can actually write in questions during these sessions. And I know neither of you can answer, but it says something about what you're talking about now, Kjersti. There is a person here writing, these images are examples up to including Uyghur detention camps. They are zoomed quite far above ground and provide little details. Is that a tech limit? So you can already see that people are, we have presented here but pictures, it presumably are pictures from detention camps, but we won't know. And I don't know if any of you are experts on the tech limits here, but that is also one of the questions that will come in when we sit there, Indian media organizations, about to interpret the pictures coming in, the streams.
If it's a limit, it will improve. So the TimeWorks Pro it. And when it comes to the Uyghurs, those are images that I need to trust as a reader to be what they claim to be. They are taken, at least those that I've seen, from a very high distance, and they are not very specific. So of course videos will improve that. So you can see from where it's taken and zoom into it, I guess. But then I think we are more and more crushing into the privacy and surveillance part also.
And surveillance, you have been very engaged in that topic, Anja, both as a researcher and as a mother, fighting the very heroic fight against the Goliaths of this industry. And for me, I mean, as a normal person, it's like, it feels very discouraging because we see this everywhere. And how can we as journalists and as citizens live with and not be totally surveyed, as you could see the video at the start of this session?
I mean, journalists, they have codes of ethics. They have a kind of ethical structures in place. So I think it's, in a way, you can say, when we are confronted with these technologies, I mean, everybody needs we need to talk more about morals and more about ethics. And that's something also I'm aware of, that we talk too much about technology, although I think we need much more progress in our moral thinking, and which includes the way how we adopt these technologies, and that we can make, as for example, Zsuzsanna Zuboff calls it, make the digital our home. And I've been active because of being part of this project and researching surveillance for many years, and thinking I'm a mother of 3 children. And what I do see as these technological possibilities of surveillance not only change journalism, but also challenge, they contribute to make, commodify in new ways things, and commercialize things that haven't been commercial on the market before. And especially if this comes into areas which before should be, for example, education and children, then I think we need to be more sensible. So, and that's the reason why I have been in public, in order to engage a debate about that, what is right and where to maybe think of different ways of establishing digital infrastructures.
Kjersti, just shortly to the end here, where should this debate be going on right now, you think?
the challenge is that we need to discuss so many things at the same time. We need to understand the technology. We need to know what the algorithms do. We need transparency. And also to find a good system for transparency. I don't think we're there yet. I think we as customers, we need personally much more understanding on what we are really contributing to, because this has become a very shady transaction. I provide something or all of my personal life, and I get good digital tools back, but I'm not really aware of what I'm giving away. And I think now we have this discussion on how the trust laws, could we break up tech? But I think we need to dive much more into the customer laws to ensure that we are empowered in the way that we're right to be empowered, and enlightened also. But and finally, I very much agree that ethics is extremely important. But the challenge for the ethics part is that, as I know it, since I've been working with press ethics for many years, you need people that are really that there is a grown-up person in the room, and the problem is that it very often isn't a grown-up person in the room. And when it comes to that ground surveillance, that your neighbor has a camera, and he can post it on Twitter, and there you go. So it's I think that we've not experienced any better times for access of information and freedom of expression, but of course not more challenging times either.
And that is something we will hear in the next session to come here. Thank you very much, Kerstin, and thank you, Anja. We will have a short break here for some minutes, 15 minutes, and then we will come back again and talking more into detail about freedom of expression and media as well. Thank you.
Folkeopprøret mot valget 2021 har samlet tusenvis av underskrifter.
Jeg kjenner det blir ganske feil å gå og stemme i morgen.
I natt ble det gjort grovt hærverk på boligen til to Kielland.
Hvordan tror du dette her kommer til å påvirke valget? Valglokalene står tomme.
Jeg synes det er helt sykt.
Dette her er rett og slett motbydelig. Videoen er falsk, og kun lagd for å ødelegge for meg og Folkedemokratene. Vi skal finne de som står bak, og i mellomtiden så ber jeg dere alle, bruk fornuft og prøv å forstå at den mannen dere ser i denne videoen ikke er meg. Takk.
I løpet av natten er det blitt lekket en video av lederen for Folkedemokratene, Tor Kielland. Dette har skapt sterke reaksjoner rundt om i landet, og kan få betydning for valget i morgen.
For første gang i valgets historie er Folkedemokratene nede på 10,3%. Til sammen var det kun 41% av befolkningen som brukte stemmeretten.
Welcome back to the second part of today's program of Visual Futures of the Media, which was introduced by yet another student video, a production made by students in television production at the University of Bergen. I'm very excited about this next session on deepfakes and what to do with them, with prominent guests chiming in from the US on the day before Inauguration Day 2021. Over to moderator Hilde Sandvik, who is joined by two researchers affiliated with the Viz Media project.
Welcome back, and I'm so honored to sit here in front of a screen where I now can see both Deborah and Nick coming in. Hi to both of you.
Hello.
Good morning, I would say. Is it very early?
Yes.
It's very early.
Early enough, yeah.
I have to admit that this session is something I've been very much looking forward to, because, I mean, we're sitting here now in Norway. You sit in Washington, Nick. And I have to ask you one question. Have you been outside of the doors now have you been sitting inside?
Embarrassingly, yes. I've been inside for days now, but I do try and go outside at least once a week. But we're trying to stay indoors this week and stay off the streets.
But both of you, we have now, I mean, what you're going to talk about is deep fakes. And it's also connected to an article you both wrote about how the different scenarios of how deep fake can actually influence elections. And tomorrow, it will be a very special day in the US. We have heard, even here. And would you say that the scenarios you had already, did it tick in? Deborah?
When you say did it kick in, I don't think we saw visibly, or certainly there wasn't a predominant deep fake that came into play in the big media. So it's hard to say that deepfakes played a big role, or it would be hard to demonstrate, you know, that they did. But certainly the election was, as everybody knows, predominated by misinformation. If anything, I think what I learned was so much damage can be done with misinformation short of deepfakes. In other words, it's not just deep fakes, it's just, I don't know what to call it.
Fake.
Ordinary.
Ordinary fake, yeah.
Yeah. Ordinary forms of communication.
Yeah. But you are here now to present some of your work, and you will do that in a conversation with me. And I'm not sure if you have divided the time between you, but would one of you just tell shortly about the article and the research you did that led up to the article? And then we can somehow, into this discussion, more and more elaborate on the topic. Who of you
Yeah,
will
why don't I
start?
take a minute to explain the scenarios a little bit that we developed. You know, one of the key ideas behind the deepfakes work Deborah and I have been developing is 2 scenarios to explore and anticipate potential ethical harms that might come about as a result of the use of deepfakes. And we looked at elections as a specific context to explore and anticipate potential harms. So what we did is we very rigorously and systematically explored the abilities of deepfakes, different types of deepfakes, images, videos, audio, the ways in which different people could use deepfakes to impact elections, so different actors, whether those be campaigns or candidates themselves, or just the broader public.
Should we just use a minute to say what a deepfake is? I mean, if people then watch and are not quite familiar with the concept, how do you define deepfake?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a deepfake is typically defined, I think, as a video or audio clip that's been synthesized using machine learning technology to appear as if an individual is doing or saying things they didn't do or say. So it's sort of a complete fashion. These artificial intelligence methods are create the pixels and create the media based on what they've learned from large data sets.
So you looked into how this used in, for instance, an election can harm the election. Yeah. And what did you find? Or what kind of scenarios did you play upon?
Yeah, so we developed how many years? I think it was 8 different scenarios. Explore the use of deepfakes in different ways.
We started off with 12 or 13 and then narrowed it down to 8. Yeah. I would say, just to refer to, I assume everyone saw the scenario developed by the students. Ours were a little bit, which I thought was very good. Ours were a little bit more detailed in sort of specifying what sort of impact they had. For example, I think that little scenario was very good at showing how a candidate for an election might be hurt. And to some extent, it showed, because it mentions turnout was diminished because of the deepfake. But we focused both on harms to the candidates as well as harms to the viewers, to people who see the deepfake and make a voting decision on the basis of that, as well as just the integrity of the voting system.
And what kind of harm were you looking into? Because I was thinking about that because I read an article today in Washington Post about the Trump era, and saying that it was a battle on the truth from the beginning. And it also says now that 1/3 of the Americans still don't believe that the election was okay. So that means that you don't even need deep fakes to make people having distrust of the system. How does that relate to your thoughts and your research? Deborah.
Yeah, I mean, my take is that deepfakes are just as part of the whole equation in terms of misinformation, disinformation. And, you know, we focused on deepfakes because it is a new phenomenon. And I think by focusing on them, we were able to explore harms of deception, of the ways in which deepfakes can be used to intimidate, for instance, through pornographic material. And you saw that suggested in the video that you showed at the beginning there. We had harms relating to reputational attacks, harms related to misattribution, so making it appear as if you said something that you didn't say, and then sort of more broadly, this of undermining trust in electoral outcomes. Now, we see deepfakes used to really push the buttons on any of these harms for 2020 in the US? I would say not, but that doesn't mean that there were some sort of more minor forays into some of these harms. So one of the cases that I wanted to just mention is, since not everyone may be following deepfakes and US politics, there was this case a few months back, related to Hunter Biden, so Joe Biden's son. And basically, there was this dossier that was distributed, which sort of casts some aspersion on Hunter Biden, sort of suggest that there was some conspiracy theory linking Hunter Biden with the Chinese Communist Party, and so on. And this document was actually spread by a fabricated identity. So it was spread by an identity with a deep fake writing it visually. And so that profile of the person spreading this false information was deep fake profile picture. So you kind of see here, the deep fake is being kind of used to hide behind, but it is sort of contributing to this larger disinformation ecosystem in order to help that disinformation kind of hide behind a fake identity. It makes it more difficult to chase who created that information, and kind of the use of these totally fabricated personas can still be used to kind of associate a political figure via their family member and via a connection out conspiracy theory.
And Deborah, one of the problems here is that it's also so hard to deceive. Do we have measures to differentiate, to see, to recognize what is deep fake?
Well, I think the technology is getting better and better, so it's getting harder and harder. I mean, early on, you could try to educate the public about where to look to detect whether something was real or not when they saw it, and that's getting less and less so as the technology gets better and better. But it's certainly one of the strategies has to do with developing either technological ways to detect or what's called, media literacy, to train the public in how to detect. But I don't know whether that's really well, we can talk about that later, whether that's the most viable strategy to cope with deepfakes. Yeah, I do want to add one other thing, and that is that one of the reasons we focused on deepfakes has to do with the fact, and this distinguishes it somewhat from other forms of misinformation, is that it's visual, and that there's something about the the power of the visual that people have relied on in determining what to trust.
Yeah.
We sort of, when we see something right before us, we think it's true. So, yeah.
But you have been, you have been into these topics for a very long time. You have written several books on the topic of ethics, computer ethics, and now the last engineering ethics. And are the production companies, or where it comes from, are we enough aware of the harmful effects of the technology? What would you say?
Well, I think I would say that we're fairly much aware of the harmful effects. I think the problem is how to control it, or how to manage it in a way that so that we get the benefits without getting these all the misinformation and the people being manipulated into believing what's not true. So yeah, it's a pretty powerful technology. The other thing that makes it difficult, I think, is that there are so many actors involved in the production of a deep fake. I mean, I think part of the ethical issues in part arise because the capability of producing deepfakes is now available to people. It's not just, you don't have to have a lot of money, you don't have to be a big organization to produce and distribute a deepfake.
But we're all familiar now with face swaps. We do this for fun. It's very easy to make a video of myself pretending to be another person. We are more aware that is happening and play with it. But you look upon the harmful effect, and you have looked into the American election. But have you seen examples on how it is used otherwhere to change outcomes of elections, or what's the worst example you have seen?
Worst example is hard to say. I don't know. I will just tell you that in preparation for today, I was kind of reading up on the last couple months of what's been happening with deepfakes, and I read about this incident. Maybe Nick knows more about it, where someone made this has to do with Australia and China's political relationship. Someone made a deepfake that depicted an Australian soldier killing a child or something like that. And this kind of got the attention of the Australian government, and who tried to, who accused the Chinese government of doing this to stir up political unrest and so it got to be a whole thing, and it was a total fabrication. The incident had never happened. So
And
yes,
just to
many other contexts. Yeah.
Nick.
And just to sort of offer a counterweight, since we're in dialogue here, I don't want us to lose sight of the idea that deepfakes aren't necessarily bad. Certainly our project focused on identifying the ethical harms that can come about, but there are examples of deepfakes being used for positive ends, even in the realm of politics. So there was one example of a politician in India during their election last year that was using a deepfake to essentially translate their campaign message in different languages to reach their constituents in their preferred language. And so I'm not sure if in the US context politicians would want to use deepfakes that way. It might undermine their authenticity of their own voice in ways that they're uncomfortable with. There are new creative ways of using this media to get your message out for promotional purposes, for advertising purposes. And I think one of the things that maybe we didn't see as much of as I thought we might is more sort of guidelines around the appropriate use of deepfakes in campaigns. I mean, there was an early decision by the Biden campaign that they were just simply not going to use them, which is a position to take. But I think it also kind of misses some potential opportunity.
Before I bring in more people into this conversation, I want you to say something about if you think that media literacy have a chance. Or are we just following after, or can we actually be up to speed with the technology?
Oh, I do. I mean, I think we can definitely continue to increase media literacy. I think technical experts, journalists, educators, we can all be out there helping to raise the level of media literacy. People need to be skeptical of what they see online, and I think we're getting there. I think more and more people are aware of the capabilities. As you referred to, Hilda, people can do this with apps on their phones. I've sort of argued in the past in some of my writing that I actually think deepfakes could be for mainstream media, insofar that once the broader public is sort of media literate and aware of the potential harms from deepfakes, those people might be incentivized to go back to the mainstream media to get the credible version of events. You know, what really happened? Is this a real video? Sort of learning to rely on mainstream quality media to put the effort in, verify and debunk these type of pieces of media that are found.
But what about the what about the industry, Deborah? What's your take on that? Do we need regulations, more regulations, for instance?
Well, I mean, it's yes. I think the simple answer is yes. The form that those regulations will take is kind of the harder question. I just want to say I want to add one thing about media literacy. I also think it has great potential, but I think the concern is that what it involves to some extent is developing mistrust in people, in what they see. And I think that's important. I mean, I like the idea. We often think that trust is so important, but I think you can make an argument for the value of mistrust. But mistrust also has some negative side effects. You know, in other words, it makes it harder to trust. You know, so yeah, I would just ask that. Yeah, I definitely think that we're seeing at least lots of pressure being put on social media platforms to do some filtering, and I think that's kind of the beginning of movements towards more regulation of media in social media in general, but that would somehow involve deep fakes.
Yeah, but because it is really, I mean, we're living in a time where reality is the new fiction. And we're also living in a time where seeing is not believing. And this article I referred to in Washington Post, it's a long article today. I think I can even say it, recommend it. And it says that it's an interview there with a psychologist saying that people who do not believe what they're seeing, it's very hard to make them turn. If you first believe in conspiracy theories, then it's very hard to get you to believe something else. And deepfakes really, I mean, if there is a value of distrust, it is also touching upon the conspiracy theories on the other hand. I have here with me now a professor of informational science focusing on human-computer interaction, Frode Guriby, sitting here with me from Bergen and listening in on this. Is this an academic discussion? Is it a discussion about journalism, or is it really more almost existential question of these days?
Yes, thank you. I also want to thank our speakers, and it's really nice to see you there on the screen again. I wish you could be here in Bergen, but we are here. And as to the question, I think that it's like if we want to think about distrust in what we're seeing, in that we don't believe in anything, and it's this kind of post-truth. And I guess that this has been discussed in social studies of science for a long time. It's nothing new in a way. It's like, so I think it's very few people that have this naive understanding that what you see on the screen, audiovisual content, that this is a veridical representation of the world or the whole picture, or that you shouldn't have some kind of critical understanding of what you're seeing, and that you should be critical. And I think that when I was thinking about this, like in the matter of deep fakes, I think that is that you can actually manipulate what it looks like people are doing. This is like the crux of the matter, I think. And I think that your concept of this persona manipulation is very good for trying to understand this. Yeah.
And you call it, is it face plagiarism? Is that the concept that you use?
I think we call it persona plagiarism. Is sort of how we framed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And persona plagiarism is that if I pretend to be someone else, or it is you steal another's persona, is it?
Yeah,
it's
like
not-
traditionally played. Go ahead.
Deborah.
Go ahead, Nick.
Deborah,
No,
you can
Nick, go
talk.
ahead.
Nick, go ahead. Okay.
Okay, so traditionally plagiarism is understood as taking else's content and attributing it to your persona. Plagiarism is taking someone else's persona and attributing your content to that persona. So it sort of inverts the content and source of the message.
Which is also quite scary, isn't it, Frode?
Yes, but it's this. When we work with design, and Nick, I know you have done this as well. You kind of create personas to see a person not necessarily in flesh and blood, but like the important characteristics, and also a politician. We all know that a politician, for example, is not the person. It's not displaying his whole personality or her own personality on stage. It's like an off-stage, backstage kind of reality there as well. So I think that these kinds of issues is things that we can have in the back of our mind. And I think Deborah is very right when she points to the media literacy that we need to. And I think these kinds of issues are.
We have even one more person here, and hopefully now we will split the screen in three. Hi, Terence Jarosh, the news editor and journalist at NX. It's a world-class video agency. I mean, we can see videos on 200 channels from your agency, even in Norway, TV2. Isn't that true? Correct?
Exactly. Hello to everybody. Hello from Luxembourg. Yes, exactly. Yes.
And when you now hear about media literacy, do you feel literate, or do you feel that you have the knowledge of detecting when you get all these streams of images coming through your agency? How do you work?
Yes, we are a news gathering, and as the other media outlet, we are very structured. So we are working with partners and source we can trust, and any source we, of course, verified. By example, with the US or for the US election or for the inauguration of Biden, we work with CBS. So we are not, alone in a big field. About deep fake, for the moment, it's really a concern, but it's not really an issue for news gathering and media. There is many reasons, but for the moment, 2020 was mainly focusing only on one topic. Mainly, it was coronavirus. So, and it affects journalists and media in any sense. So there was not much room to focus on deep fake. And of course, there was the US election. We got some concern about deep fake about the US election, but I consider, as many journalists, that the deep fake are part of the, the fake news big bag. So, as Nicola and Deborah said, it's part of the misinformation technique and strategy.
And if we should listen to Deborah and when she talks about the value of distrust, how could that influence journalism? Is it a value that should be built in? Of course, we have editors, we have it screened, so on and so forth. Is it anything that journalism can actually build upon?
I mean, I think that's the crux of an argument I've tried to make in the past, is that even as media literacy may encourage more mistrust in visual media that people come across online, that if people are also literate enough to know that, they can also know that if they go to a mainstream outlet or a trusted outlet for news information, that information has been vetted, has been verified, is collected from trustworthy individuals with sort of a chain of trust that extends to the consumption of that material. And so value of distrust in social media may end up encouraging more trust in mainstream media because of mainstream media's consistent, thoughtful approach, because of their transparency, because of their reliable processes. And so I think if mainstream media can really get out in front of this, they could be in a position to take advantage of the situation.
But when you hear now that Terence...
Could I add
yeah, of course.
I'd like to add something here because I think I completely agree with Nick, and I would just say it a little differently and add a point that if the public is mistrustful of what they see, it does put the burden on the media to demonstrate their trustworthiness. And the reason I think this is so important is because I think in the U.S. in this whole election fraud controversy, one of the things that keeps crying out to me that is never attended to is it doesn't seem that the press or journalism has done a very good job demonstrating viscerally the difference between the New York Times and some blog post, and in teaching people about the filtering and the decisions that a trusted media would go through versus this kind of casual thing. I mean, people don't seem to recognize that, the difference in how the information is produced. So, and that would be one of the ways you would develop trust by showing how you do what you do and how it's different from this other stuff that they're reading.
No, but Terence, I was thinking about that because it seems as if it's quite a high hill to climb up on these days. When you hear that 1/3 of the Americans actually do not believe in this election, then it's a big task for the media as well. How should the media organizations work with that?
Yes, as I said, it's a concern for a while, and I agree with Deborah and Nicholas. It's a big challenge for all the media, but it's also an opportunity here to bring back the trust. And we have seen with the coronavirus crisis, the people are coming back to the media, and they just maybe. They twist a little. The trust is a little bit twist here, but it's all of that is fragile, of course. But when you have 4 years to just come back to the U.S. election, or mainly the U.S. politics, I'm not a specialist about that, but as I've seen, every day transmitting any live about Trump, about his statement, speech, every day, almost every day for 4 years, and mainly last year. Last year I guess we just offer to our partners more than 270 lives just about Trump. So we can hear and verify at the moment, really on real time, what he's saying. And of course, we can notice immediately what he's saying. Sometimes it's totally wrong. And I guess the journalists there, and mainly the U.S. media, demonstrate that they can, face that. And some of them just sometimes debunk or verify real time. And maybe you remember it happened that CNN or other TV channel just cut the live signal of a speech of Trump because they consider what he's saying it's totally wrong. So I guess on that, media take their responsibility quite seriously, but it's not easy, of course.
No, it's not easy, Frode. As an academic, what do you say?
No, I keep coming back to this. If we want to look at deepfakes, I also think that the flip side. Now we've been talking about the potential harmful effect, but I think that this is another tool in the toolbox. If you want to do misinformation, well, you can do misinformation, but I also see an expressive potential in these technologies. And I was thinking this concept of persona also got me thinking about, what a great tool for satire, for example, it is. and also to challenge authority. And so it has a lot of different potential uses. And I think that I was thinking about this series of the Spitting Image that was running in the 80s, 90s in the UK, where they were having really good satire over Margaret Thatcher and even the Queen, God forbid, but yeah.
And no,
So
I mean, we could see Queen Elizabeth having a New Year's speech, and that was a deep fake, wasn't it, Deborah?
Yeah, that's true. You know, this brings us to, we haven't mentioned this at all, but, you know, one of the strategies to deal with deep fakes would involve labeling. So I thought of that because of the mention of satire. I mean, I don't know if you think it would undermine or ruin satire if it were labeled as such, but there is a difference. I mean, satire is fine if you know it's satire, but one of the things that we learned in our paper, or figured out in our paper, was that something can be posted as a satire but not labeled. But you and I might see it as satire, but it can be picked up and then reposted in some context in which the viewers don't know that it's satire. So there has to be something about labeling that, you know, that makes it clear to somebody that what they're seeing has been, you know, is synthetic, or, I mean, we'd have to think about how we label things, but that it's not a direct, you know, reflection of what happened.
Can I ask you, since you're both sitting in the US right now, and one from Washington at least here, what do you expect from the next days in news reporting, and also possible fakes that we will be presented of? I mean, I spoke to you before, I think I spoke to you the 5th of January. And then I asked you what will happen tomorrow, and I will now start again, because I don't think either of you foresaw what happened in Capitol Hill. But what do you think now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could depend who's running and their appetite for using some of these tools in different ways. You know, I think one of the aspects of the technology that we didn't dig into in our research thus far is really the potential impact of synthetic text. So sort of the non-visual analog to deepfake. You have the same types of machine learned tools and technology that can synthesize comments, synthesize propaganda, maybe even synthesize entire articles that look like news, but they're not grounded in fact in any way. And you've already seen examples of this reported in the media, where it's been shown that the text can certainly be propaganda ways. I mean, I think a question for me, how this technology could be used to sort of create astroturfing campaigns or the appearance of support for particular political ideas that maybe have no grounding in the political will of the people.
How do you work now, Terence, to detect fakes? Not only deep fakes, but all kind of fakes that might come through your agency?
Well, we have a couple of tools, but of course, as I said, as we are very structured and we are distributing video material. So we work with TV channels who have their own newsroom and their journalists. So we are in a very structured organization. So the main thing I could see sometimes is we are very, very focusing, verifying the UGC, the video we are taking from the social media sometimes. So that we are to be very careful. And maybe that's possibly a risk in the future years with the deepfake, because deepfake is spreading into social media. Nobody will send a deepfake to a media or to journalists saying that, okay, that's a video I found. What do you think about it? That doesn't work like this. It's spreading like, I would say, a virus on the social media. It's very quick, and as I can say that the deepfake depends on the context. the context of a parody, of a movie, or comedy, or news, and of course the intention. And I like what Deborah and Nicolas said about the harmful effect. There is an effect, and the effect is very, very powerful and immediate. It's very quick. So for the deep fake, it could be very harmful and very quickly. Then there is not much relation at this stage with journalism, but then the damage done by a deepfake, whatever it is, could become, or even with the fake news, become a news story, and we have to talk about it, or we have to explain to the people how deepfake is working. That's for the moment the real task of a journalist. Yeah, that's the main thing. And if I may add something, we talk, because deepfake is very visual, of course. It's photo or video, and we talk about that. Just video or photo, it's mainly used for the moment by the pornography industry. But we maybe underestimated the audio and how we can fake an audio, and that's more difficult to spot and to find a solution to debunk. And there is a couple of examples on that, but audio is also something that we must not underestimate.
That is unfortunately the last word here in this session. Thank you so much, Frode. Thank you, Deborah, Nick, and thank you, Terence. I hope this virus won't get us into a quarantine, at least. And good luck for tomorrow, I would say. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
Now
you,
there will be another 15 minutes break here, and then after that we will come back with more challenging, intriguing topics. Thank you.
Loading simulation. Field trip starting in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, Tobias. Can I have your attention, please? Does anyone know where we are?
Bryggen?
That's right. This is actually what Bryggen looked like in 2020. Bryggen was the first area to be affected by the water levels rising. Now, can anybody tell me what the main purpose of Bryggen was?
Trading?
Yes, originally this was a center of commercial activities. However, in 2020, Bryggen was one of the main tourist attractions in Bergen.
Guys, I gotta take a piss. Can we take a break?
Yeah, sure.
Holly, pause.
Pausing simulation. You are now back in 2082.
Okay, guys, I'm back.
Simulation continued. Welcome back.
Welcome back to our third session in today's program on experimental learning in immersive environments, which we opened with a future vision of teaching and learning in a video made by students in television production at the University of Bergen. Our first presenter in this session is my colleague Lars Nyra, professor of media design at the Department of Information Science and Media Studies. Locally and nationally, Lars is known and respected as an incredibly energetic and popular teacher with a unique take on teaching and learning. And his talk is titled Innovation Pedagogy for Experimental Journalism.
Thank you, Evan. Very nice words you had to say. So I'll have to repeat, my title is Innovation Pedagogy for Experimental Journalism, 5 years of experience in Viz Media. And if we had had 5 more years, I'm sure we would have made the technology we just saw in the video. Yes. So I have been teaching these modern, disruptive, strange media for many years, since 2008, and I will try to link this to also following up my the central themes that have been discussed so far today and bring in those educational perspectives that I'm mostly into. So I want to say that during times of rapid transformation in the media, it is important to explore the potential of new technology in responsible ways. The futures of the media can be created at least partly by academic researchers and our students. New technologies such as drones, virtual reality, and eye tracking have potential for journalistic innovation, but how do we explore these potentials? And what may we find? It is a difficult job, but it is our duty as academics to dig into this matter. So, beware of the future. Digital technologies create what many call permanent disruption. It has been discussed a lot today at this conference. You could say that industrial mutations incessantly revolutionize established practices, disrupting and replacing professions that have existed for decades or maybe even centuries. There is no established knowledge, no academic expertise, and no tradition to help us with these new things or with the ways that they change things. For 5 years, Viz Media has involved students in our investigations of new visual technologies. Young people are, for good and bad, as a cliché and as a real critical force, the true explorers of new technological terrain. Viz Media has explored teaching methods that can help students to deal competently and confidently with disruptive technologies. The exploration is essential and will have to continue beyond this media. So, the innovation culture of new media, including its skills, practices, and values, was developed in Silicon Valley, to simplify a little bit. Entrepreneurs and companies over there have developed the lion's share of mobile apps, AI solutions, and other digital infrastructures. These have been imported wholesale to Norway and other smaller countries, and we have had no choice but to accept them. So, my slogan is, I'd rather go to Bergen Valley than to Silicon Valley. The Norwegian media industry have to equip themselves with independently owned technology to stop Facebook and Google from taking over content production, advertising, and innovation. Local media must make their own designs that fit with our towns and villages and our fjords and mountain valleys. So, local academics must help. We must take part in the design of media solutions and build normative qualities into them. Media design is one approach or one name for a way to explore the capacity of new technology to support quality journalism, other types of media production, local ownership, nynorsk language, and participation from regular citizens in the public sphere. So media design wants to contribute to an adaptation of skills and practices in journalism and other types of media production so that they fit better with new media. Senior academics must inspire students to contribute to this local technology development. These youngsters will soon enough become important people in NRK, TV 2, Bergens Tidende, and Askøyværingen. So from these positions, they will shape the public sphere and its qualities in the future. We have to inspire them while they are at the university. So, innovation pedagogy is an approach that attempts to do exactly this. These ideals that I'm projecting can be partly, or at least we can attempt to implement these ideals by teaching students to participate in the design of media that will presumably be important in the future. The method consists of exposing students to a strong sense of uncertainty in a planned way, so that they become robust, if you still can accept that word. The theorist Lotte Darse, a Danish innovation theorist, says it like this: it is about helping the students to learn how to live with permanent uncertainty in a fragile world full of paradoxes that cannot be solved. They must be taught to believe in themselves, to have self-confidence, and to be able to motivate themselves. Successful innovation pedagogy makes the students able to take charge of technology explorations that have a risk of not being mastered by themselves, a risk of not being completed for various reasons, and also they are taught how to take responsibility for these projects in public settings, like if the minister visits and you will have to show what you are good for. In this way, students are forced, you could say, to become used to change. They will be better able to deal with these disruptive innovations and better able to infuse these novelties with democratic values or with other important values. And this behavioral quality can be called innovation competence. These words are kind of similar to each other, but you could say that innovation pedagogy results in innovation competence if it is successful. There is also traditional pedagogy. It's basically about handing over established knowledge and techniques to novices, to beginners. So the experts train the young people to do things the right way. There may be 150 students in the classroom, and they may all learn the same in exactly the same way. And while this type of pedagogy is valuable for many purposes, for example, fundamental mathematics, that doesn't change so often, it doesn't work so well in contexts where both the industry, the teachers, and the students are overwhelmed by new technologies and by new possibilities that are not included in the established pedagogy. So, in the 5 years that Viz Media was active, we provided students with access to technologies that have these characteristics that I'm talking about. They had previously not been explored in our local university context. But Viz Media allowed us to buy drones, 360 cameras, VR headsets, eye tracking equipment, and even robots. Students were put in charge of explorations that neither teachers nor industry people were experts on. The students became the innovators, while the teachers assisted them in the attempt. Quick image of drone flying rehearsals or training. In 2016 and 2017, students designed prototypes of drone applications for journalism. Here we see two of them. Synced is a service to provide high-quality sound along the film path of a drone, and it is suitable especially for nature documentary filmmakers. 3Drone is a service for automatic scanning and 3D modeling of outdoor structures like houses and ships, and it is also suitable for filmmakers. These were not made as actual products, but they were made as prototypes that showed the principles. Several of these things have become more common as time has progressed. I will stop at this for a little while. D-Rig is an automated camera drone to assist a journalist who needs to produce video recordings all by herself because of a lack of salary for more journalists to go out together, for example. And it is suitable for local newspapers and regional TV stations. One of the students explained her motivation like this. We thought about the requirement that it should be useful for a journalist and saw that there were no particular products in that sector. So we decided to create the drone rig, where a TV journalist can go out and do a live report alone if there is no camera person available. She will not need to take a course in drone flying to be able to use the drone rig. She just grabs it and runs. So this was a fun project, no doubt, and it is easy to notice how experimental it is. D-Rig is radical because it presumes breaking the rules. The regulations specify that a drone cannot be used without notifying everybody in its flight path and also having a team of at least 2 or 3 skilled persons to supervise the flight. Their prototype of a drone camera assistant for breaking news would be impossible to realize as long as the current rules apply, but it is a good idea nevertheless, and it is an example of the students' natural ability to be inventive, daring, and at the same time pragmatic. So these projects could have become commercial successes, I'm sure. In 2020, we charged our students with another task of creating responsible climate communication and attempt to attract a young audience for it. They were to find out what kind of visual design mobile apps could have in order to present the gravity of climate change in the best way. The students used eye tracking, stress bracelets, and also traditional interview methods to find out how people reacted to everything from newspaper articles to interactive installations at the museum. On the basis of the evaluations, the students made prototypes that communicate climate change information in a, presumably at least, more efficient way than existing solutions and existing news coverage. The goal was to make users more knowledgeable about their own positive and negative contributions to climate change. Bergen Climate Travel presents local climate change right in front of you. With the help of AR technology and your smartphone's camera, the app visualizes a time travel that shows how Bergen is influenced by climate change. This concept was quite successful, actually, and it is now about to become a product in collaboration with Fløibanen AS in a potential, or at least there is an exploration of this possibility this semester. So I have one more example. Klimagotchi, with a wonderful name, attempts to foster responsibility and commitment. The user takes on weekly behavioral challenges, such as cycling to work or not eating meat for a week. If you fail, the globe avatar will suffer. The Klimagotchi application reacts to your physical activities as well as your purchasing habits and turns the surveillance potential of smartwatches and mobile phones into a, presumably again, benign tool for cataloging your climate footprint. Okay, so although this media ends, innovation pedagogy for experimental journalism continues under a new name. The funding body DIKU has granted 5 million Norwegian kroner for further development of innovation pedagogy. The work we did in this media was instrumental to this new success. We can now focus even more actively on practical explorations of new technology. We can develop more subtle value orientations, more complex didactical methods, and more advanced theoretical underpinnings for our projects. And this project will run for 3 years, from 2021 to 2023. Final slide, robotics. Robots is the next level in educational experimentation. In 2020, we had master students making Peter, the personal trainer robot. It draws on your health record to present the best possible training regime for your body. And AI cybernetics governs the exercises down to the very last detail. If it were realized as a product, it would surely revolutionize the training gym industry. Young people are concerned about the future, and they are able and ready to take responsibility. So they will be able to take charge of the incessant flow of disruptive technologies and make the best out of them. They are unafraid to criticize bad solutions and are motivated to make attempt after attempt at succeeding with good, responsible, locally relevant solutions. So nobody is better placed than them to stop Facebook, Google, and other multinational companies from taking over innovation and design in our country. This is the social energy that innovation pedagogy must channel and cultivate into a responsible research and innovation paradigm for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Lars. Certainly going to be exciting to follow Tech Lab and what emerges from it over the coming years. Our second presenter for this session on experimental learning in immersive environments is Joachim Vindnes, a PhD candidate at the Center for the Science of Learning and Technology at the University of Bergen, and a tech wizard of sorts. Joachim will be talking about virtual reality as a meta-medium. Joachim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joachim Vindnes, yes, and I'm a PhD candidate here. And as part of my PhD, I've been very lucky to work as a teacher for students who are learning about new media. And the title that I've chosen for this presentation is Virtual Reality as a Meta-Medium. Now, I will explain why understanding virtual reality in this way will be important for the way that we teach the technology to students, and also how we imagine the importance of the technology for the future. So the overall point that I wish to make is that VR is perhaps least of all least of all technologies. One might infer, of course, that what then is this, which is a VR headset, the technology that brings you to this world. And it's certainly a thing, it's an object that fits in my hand, but what I mean by it not being a thing is that when this VR headset is utilizing its proper function, then it sort of ceases to be an object that I relate to. So when I use it, when I sort of put it on, take it in front of my face, then instead of seeing the VR headset, I rather see whatever it presents. And this is very, very flexible. So it is this that takes us to the notion of a meta-medium, that the function of VR is to be other things. So in 1977, the American information scientist Alan Kay deemed the personal computer a meta-medium because it was able to combine various other media into one medium or one experience. Now, VR is sort of an extreme version of this because it can not just combine every media that we know of, it can even combine media that we haven't even thought of yet because of the way that it simulates experiential phenomena of reality. So this is what I mean by VR not being a thing. When it exercises its proper function, it is anything but an object. It is instead very dependent on exploration, what we find out that VR really is. We might sort of, in ways, not have seen it yet. It can become whatever the designer wants it to be. So recognizing the nature of VR has implications for the way that we relate to the technology. As researchers and ethicists in teaching to our students, and in research. So understanding new media and what the things do will be important because the way that it impacts our society and our involvements with the world. Here, VR is in particular importance because the way that it simulates reality gives it very much power, because what we see is, of course, in many examples what we believe, and when we see it formatted as reality around us, then it can really have power over us. So other media, such as TV and smartphones, are very clearly exactly this. They are media. So media means middle, and these media stand in the middle between us and our worlds. In VR, you can't see the bounds of the medium in the same way, and it doesn't appear to abstract information. So this can, be likened to the deepfakes that we talked about earlier today. It is presented as if it is real. And when this is the case for a more widespread adoption of VR, then these are important questions. So this is a great avenue for research, but also research through education. So at the University of Bergen, we've run 2 courses in the teaching of VR and 360-degree video, so-called immersive media. And these courses were taught under the innovation pedagogy regime that Lars Nyhre had been just spoke about. So with any new medium, of course, there is uncertainty regarding its possibilities, and we don't know how the technologies will or even can successfully be used. So the question is how we can teach these technologies to our students when there is so little research or even how-to knowledge in the industry of how to do this. So although it's not possible to learn away things you don't know yourself by means of conventional knowledge transfer, it is possible to facilitate for exploration and learning through doing, as Lars was talking about. In this way, the students are challenged to tackle these challenges in a more direct manner. And here also I think that the perspective of the meta-medium comes to place. VR can't really be taught as a thing that we know what is and how it affects things, simply because it isn't that. So VR ought rather to be conceived of as an avenue for experience. And in order to see what possibility lies within that, we need exploration. And in our 2 courses, facilitating this worked beyond our expectations, at least mine. So here you can see some of the posters of the VR productions of our students. One of the productions, Plastic, was a documentary for children showing the effects of plastic pollution on our environments. Schizophrenia is a journalistic piece allowing you yourself to experience what it might be like to experience the effects of the reality-shattering disorder of schizophrenia. Narcomanía, or Drug Addict, shows what it's like to be a drug addict living on the streets in Bergen, based on interviews with drug addicts. And in a more experimental manner, Cryonics tries to imagine what it's like being frozen upon death. So the year after, students created 4 other productions. In Digital Dictatorship, you're able to experience what it's like living in Bergen with a social monitoring system akin to what's being tried out in China. And in 1340 meter above sea level, you get to go on a hike and take choices to avoid an avalanche. In Skogvokteren, you are put inside the mind of a serial killer. And in Kunst, you get to enter into a painting of Norwegian painter Astrup at the Kode Museum in Bergen. So although these are VR productions and 360-degree videos that are made to be experienced in VR using a head-mounted display like this, I have compiled a very short video compilation just to give you a small impression of what the students have made. So we can play that. So here you see plastic. You are seeing the plastic produced each year visualized as a football field around you, and more keeps popping up. In Schizophrenia, you experience like spiders on the floor, hallucinations, and violent self-referential narrative, hallucinations on the walls in terms of melting paintings. And here you get to make choices immersed in a group and learn the consequences of your decisions, such as, perhaps unfortunately suffering an avalanche. In Digital Dictatorship, if you try to get a free pass at the local city rail, you lose your social credit, and unfortunately people don't want to be with you anymore. So that's kind of, not nice. Here you can go into Kode Museum Bergen and actually enter a virtual recreation of the painting and be able to move about within the scene. Yeah, and here's the darker aspect of what you can simulate in virtual reality, not necessarily the best experience if you like cozy things. Same can be said for Cryonics. Here you can hear different philosophical perspectives on what it's like being frozen. And in Narcomanía, you are put inside of the drug addict, also being shunned in the streets. So the students did most of this work themselves. We put very few constraints on what they were allowed to create. And in this way, they were able to themselves experiment and explore with this medium and sort of feel the real tensions in terms of what they wanted to create. So what we did as teachers was to make them focus on the experiential, play and explore with both environments and identities, and focus on first-person experiences. So last slide, the students also planned these productions themselves. And by facing the challenges of the medium so directly, they had to create ways of planning for this, which in VR is very unique because you have a person inside the actual experience. So planning for interactivity in these kind of productions, when you still want to convey a message, is hard. And here we see some of the unique 360-degree, three-dimensional, and interactive prototypes that they have created. So in summary, facilitation for student exploration when facing challenges has been a very successful approach for us, and this has allowed students to learn by doing, and us as teachers also to learn in the same process. Thank you.
Thanks, Joachim. Once again, this session on experimental learning will be followed by conversation and discussion. The Viz Media project has fostered a community not only for researchers, but also for students, as will be evident at this point. I think I'm speaking for every researcher affiliated with the project when I say that the student contributions have been instrumental. Learning, of course, is a form of research, and for the researcher, to teach is to share ideas about something, to rub your ideas against the mind of a younger generation. Hilde Sandvik will once again be moderating. Over to you, Hilde.
Thank you very much. And this is the last session, so now we're going to sum up with these two ladies sitting here. And it's you're not chosen. I mean, it's not a coincidence that you two sit here right now. Barbara Wasson is a professor and director for the Center of the Science of Learning and Technology, SLATE. Welcome to you. And here, Oddrun Samdal, you have been here, I mean, you were here from the beginning today and welcomed us all. You are still the Vice Rector of Teaching and Learning at the University of Bergen. And sitting in this day and listening into all these complex dilemmas, almost existential problems, what is left with you? Or what do you think now about your task as well as really a Vice Rector now at the university?
Well, I think what we have, or I have learned throughout the day is, and seen, observed, heard about, is how students are actually immersed in a learning situation. And that is what we really want our students to have that opportunity to.
It's not only the students, I mean, it's teachers and professors
as well.
Yeah.
So we certainly, and I think the Lars Nyhre's emphasis there about also how the teachers and researchers are, how do you say, challenged in a way. And it's this combined learning then, if you like, that takes place. But it's very much exploring, but with the academic approach to learning, with the critical sense as the basic of this learning experience. But also being immersed and trying also to contribute to the development, but keeping in mind the basics of ethics and a critical sense of the learning process as well as the developmental innovation process.
Barbara, you have also been here all day, and what will you take with you from here when you leave?
I think that for me the most striking thing is a lot of the challenges we have around the kind of data that we get. Because my center is the National Center for Learning Analytics, where we look at what data is collected about us in learning situations and how we can use that to understand learning better. And we have all the same challenges with trust and mistrust and with are we allowed to have this data, all the issues around that. And when you want to, say, introduce a technology or an app into a school, the teachers want to know, what do the students learn with this? And in order to do that, we need to look at the data that we get. And as within the types of things we've seen today, there's many types of new data, many types of new multimodal data. The technologies create new data. And how do we deal with that in a good, critical way?
Because, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities here, as and when we now saw the long list of projects that have been, gone through the university here. Of course, a lot of opportunities, but also harm. That is what we see around the world now. And it creates this huge challenge for universities and for academics. And how should we actually make sure that trust and mistrust is not overrunning each other? Oddrun.
No, again, I think this the academic basis and the critical sense that needs to be guiding the technology development, as well as the understanding of how the technology works and how it can be damaging and prevent the use of the damaging part. So I think it is key to us that we are able to maintain the focus on the critical sense and the development of that in this regard, and to make sure that we do not contribute to technology development that is misused.
But do we have enough resources? I mean, this is it. We should have had a cake celebrating the 5 years of this media here. Are we fully equipped? Do we know enough? Are we now risking to stop working on things before it has started? What do you think?
I think you need to be immersed in innovation and look at the opportunities, but keeping in mind how you contribute to that the technology is used in ethically good ways. And I cannot stress enough this critical sense that I think is the strongest contribution of a university education as to how technologies are used.
Yeah. Last called it innovative competence.
Yes.
How do you hear? What do you hear when it talks about that?
I think he talked about innovation competence. I think it has many aspects of other competencies in it as well, and I think it's going to be an interesting concept to work further on. For example, from my perspective, I'm really a promoter of data literacy because we really have a need for everybody to understand what data is being collected, how it's being used, what happened, but also on a technical level about data, where it's being stored, how long is it stored for, what can we use it for, etc. And I think that has a lot in common with the media literacies that other people brought up here. So I think it's an interesting concept that we need to investigate further as to what is actually going to be covered by it. But I suspect it has aspects both of data and media literacy as well.
What do you think the university here will work with? Can you reveal some of your plans for the building we're sitting in here and for the university in Bergen?
I think what the Media City Bergen really has achieved through their strong collaboration with the media businesses there is a very good example of how we as a university can be in a liaison and partnership with our surroundings, and that can contribute to the development of our teaching and our research and the competence that we bring about, but that at the same time then is made available to the local businesses. So I think what we want to contribute is very much a knowledge-based, scientific-based development of practices, and in this regard, the media technology and critical journalism. So I think for us to have this close collaboration with the businesses around and how that can challenge us as an institution, but also how we as an institution can challenge back and make sure that in this regard, again, that technology is used in a good and a very responsible way.
What kind of pitfalls do you see, Barbara?
Oh. Yeah, I think this is a good question, because who actually drives the innovation? Because if we look at some of the examples they had earlier, it is the big companies driving innovation in schools. We see in Norway, it's really hard to fight against the Microsofts and the Googles and everything that end up in the schools. And we see in our collaborations towards ed tech that there is maybe a little lack of competence within the small up-and-coming startups, so we need to work on that, especially when it comes to using, for example, artificial intelligence and these technologies in developing learning tools, and also taking into use new kinds of media, new kinds of data that you can collect. So I think we have a responsibility as a university of taking up these issues and preparing our students for going out. And I think, as we've seen from the work that both Lars and Joachim presented, the students are very able to come with innovative ideas, and we just have to help them identify the questions they need to ask about if they were, say, going to commercialize the products or things like that.
But since I've been studying art history and not social science, I am also very, interested in the existential potential in this. And we've been talking about trust and distrust all day. And also to be aware of what this does to us as human beings. Because it is a fact that our brain even changes when for instance, VR is affecting the brain very, very concretely. And can you say something about, if it is possible to say something about that topic as well? how we now prepare students, youngsters, to also raise the right questions and to be aware of our existential potential.
Yeah, that is something that we are aiming to address and currently have been doing so by establishing what we call cross-disciplinary and cross-faculty study programs, where you bring together different perspectives on technology or artificial intelligence, for instance. So to bring on board the humanities perspective on technology development, and I heard it already taken care of to a large extent in the examples we've heard today, again, raising the critical questions. But I think it's important that we deal with that even more systematically, and where students can follow courses, or where the humanistic perspectives would be integrated along with the more media technology approach that we have here. So we do currently have developments ongoing. And I think what is important is that we bring about meeting places. So one thing is the development of the study programs, but also that researchers meet and work together cross-disciplinary, and again, raising important research questions and bringing that into education.
Because there are two separate ways of going here, but because one road we can pick is, of course, to be more and more specialized, and there are huge demands. I mean, if you're going to follow up on this and also to be aware of what is happening here, it's a huge map to map it out. And Joachim said it as well, that a lot of the time it is actually the student almost educating the teacher, and it's a dilemma here, isn't it, Barbara?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to think for a second. Yeah, I think ever since we've seen, if we looked at the history of technology, the young people have always been pushing everybody. And I think in some of my studies looking at schools, we always saw the most successful classrooms where the teacher actually could take a step back and allow the students to develop and innovate and to know more than they did, because we know how to ask questions and we know to help guide them, but they can do the innovation for us. There's no problem with that, and I think all of us who have kids know that that's the way it is at home too. You know, even just running the smart clickers on smart TVs, you know. And I think we have to be open to allowing that innovation to happen, but at the same time helping them see the multidisciplinary aspects of it. And I think that Oddrun was correct here, like this multidisciplinarity, what is the role of it? Where does the depth in a subject area come in? When should interdisciplinary come in? Do you need to have a depth in a domain first before you start thinking of it, or should it come in? I think we don't know the answers to that, but I think it's a very positive development that we're trying to see, how this needs to happen. And, does it mean we have to go back to a 4-year bachelor in Norway? Actually, that's one of my questions, because, we need to introduce a lot of these aspects around innovation.
And how would you do that?
Well, that's a big, that's a big question. But if you're thinking, like, I've seen programs. I'm from Canada, and I've seen programs there where all engineers take a lot of courses in innovation at the same time as they're studying, and so you need to think about how to put these things together. So that's a much bigger question than I can answer.
Oddrun.
Yeah, we have started some exploration as to bringing a broader basis into a bachelor degree, because it is true that after the last reform that we had in higher education, that we have gotten very narrow bachelor programs, and opening up, or whether demanding, but at least facilitating more cross-faculty disciplinary combinations would be an important step forward. So we are looking into models of how we can stimulate that, and then think that the specialization will come more clearly at master's level.
I have to admit that I very often think, as the Chinese do, we live in interesting times. I know that the Chinese don't think that is a very good concept, but we do live in interesting time, and I guess it is a very interesting time to be able to now lead the work here at the university into the future. I will just thank both of you, Oddrun and Barbara, for joining in on this last conversation from today, and a very interesting day. And I have to say also thank you for the possibility to sit here to ask all these questions.
Well, it's been a rich day of thought-provoking talks and discussions, and we certainly do have a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. On behalf of the organizers, I want to thank all the presenters, the moderators, and you, the audience. Thank you.